Good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Andy Karr. My name is Jamie Madsen. I'm the Director of Events at Copperfield's and I'll also be your host for the evening. So just a couple of notes before we get started. The virtual format is a 30 to 35 minutes of speaking, and then will be followed by a live Q&A. For any questions or comments that you have tonight, go ahead and submit them under the Q&A icon, which is at the bottom right of your screen. Again, if you throw them in the chat box, that's no problem. I'll see them. Additionally, everyone tonight is a Copperfield's member, which means you get 10% off of your copy of the book. We appreciate the support of independent bookstores, and I know it's not huge, but it's just a little token of appreciation. I'll go ahead and include that in the chat box. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our author. Andy Karr is a Buddhist teacher, author, and photographer who offers profound insights into Dharma and mind. Karr trained under Suzuki Roshi and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche before moving to Paris in 1979, where he co-founded the first Shambhala Center in France. He currently continues to teach meditation and Buddhism. And tonight he's with us to celebrate his latest title, Into the Mirror, a Buddhist journey through mind, matter, and the nature of reality. So thanks for being with us tonight, Andy. I'm really excited to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jamie, for introducing me, and thanks to Copperfield Books for hosting this. I really appreciate independent bookstores and how much they contribute to the local culture where they are. And in this age where we have these gigantic monolithic online things that are gobbling up so much of the business, it's great to know that there are independent bookstores out there that are thriving. So tonight I'm going to give you some of the main logics of Into the Mirror. The book is a guidebook for a profound spiritual journey in an age of materialism. We are certainly in an age of materialism on many levels, on the level of science and philosophy, on the level of culture, on the level of consumerism. It permeates the modern world. I don't want to give the impression that the modern world is completely negative, or that I'm anti-science or anti-modernity. So I thought I would begin by talking about a couple of features of the modern world to give you some sense of perspective of what I'm concerned with. One of the most important and valuable contributions that science has made is that it has doubled the human lifespan. 100 years ago, the average lifespan of people was about 40 years. Today, it's about 80 years. That's true not just in North America or in the developed world, it's true everywhere. And there are three scientific discoveries that are the cause of this doubling in our lifespan. The discovery of antibiotics, the discovery of vaccines, and the discovery of germ theory, and in particular, the pasteurization of milk. A lot of young kids died because of infected milk. So we now live about twice as long as people did at the start of the 20th century. whether we're using that extra lifetime well or not is a whole other question. But science's contribution to our well-being in that way has been amazing and fantastic. On the other hand, in 2019, the United Nations produced a report that said that in the coming years, up to 1 million species of animals and plants might become extinct. This isn't the only huge impact on our world that science and industry have released. Everyone knows about the threats of atomic war, environmental degradation. Now we're inventing artificial intelligence that, according to some people, has the potential, maybe a small potential, but a potential to wipe out the human race. So science's impact and progress has these two sides to it. What I think is hard for us to notice because it's so much a part of our environment. It's like the air we breathe. It's that science and what it observes has become basic truth. And what it doesn't observe seems to not exist. Now, there are a lot of people who reject those things, but I think by and large, most of us, at least probably most of us tuning into this, believe that science reveals truth. But because of its power, which I've been talking about already, how incredibly powerful science has been in affecting our world, it seems like everything must be what science tells us it is. And this leads to materialism, the belief that everything is made out of physical stuff, the stuff described by physics, that it's made out of particles and forces, and that's really all there is. If it's not something that's validated by science, it's hard to imagine that it exists. And the one thing that science is not able to evaluate, and probably never can, is the mind. So materialism makes the mind into a second-class citizen. Sometimes scientists or philosophers describe it as an epiphenomena, something that comes out of physical stuff. They don't know how to explain how that happens, but it's not really the main thing. It's just an outgrowth of it. Some people even argue that the mind is an illusion, although that's a hard sell because an illusion has to appear to somebody, to some mind. So this kind of belief, and it's a belief, is a type of amnesia. Science observes phenomena, it creates, or scientists rather, because science isn't an entity, but scientists observe phenomena, they create theories about it, they create models and equations and explain how things work, how they exist. But all of these activities happen in the mind. They happen in the minds of scientists. And then we non-scientists inherit their models and beliefs. But the things described by physicists or biologists aren't things that exist in nature. Nobody ever sees a quark. They arrange machines that produce electrical signals that are analyzed in computers and statistically assessed and come up with conclusions about their models of reality. But these are not things that are in the natural world. These are mental phenomena. So materialism is something that arises in the mind. It's not something that arises in nature. The models of things that science presents don't exist in nature, they exist in our minds. So it's like amnesia. You have forgotten the source of all this knowledge. Even the word knowledge presupposes knowing. Knowing is mental. Knowing is not a physical thing. So one of the aspects of materialism is the belief that consciousness or the mind is a product of the brain. It's clear that when people talk about the brain and neuroscience and so on, that they're talking about things that are experienced. They're not talking about something that is independent of observation, of experience, of knowledge. So to believe that the mind is secondary to the brain is another very hard sell. The mind, if you look at your own experience, you probably will acknowledge that you know stuff, that you're aware, that you have mind. You may not be able to touch it or explain it or understand it, but there's something it's like to be you. There's experience. That's got to be primary. Anything else we know through the mind. In fact, we don't have any access to anything outside the mind. The idea that there are extra-mental phenomena, things that exist independently of our experience of them, is a theory. It's an intuitive theory. It is what we do to explain why things appear in consistent ways. But we can never get outside of the mind to prove this theory, to demonstrate that there is anything that exists independently of our experience. So this may sound like a whole bunch of philosophical hoo-ha, like, who cares? Why am I going on about all this? Well, there's a simple reason. Mind is the source of happiness and sorrow. It's the source of bondage and liberation. Those are very Buddhist things to say, and I'm saying them as a Buddhist. Materialism would have us believe that the source of happiness is stuff, things you could possess. And the source of unhappiness is bad stuff. But all of that happens in mind. And if mind is a second-class citizen, or you think it's an illusion, you'll never be able to work with your mind in a way to produce more happiness and more freedom. It becomes easier and easier to see how people are on treadmills of searching for possessions, searching for meaning, searching for stuff, searching for anything that will produce lasting happiness. And it doesn't seem to be the case that any amount of stuff ever produces that happiness. If we look at Elon Musk, for example, who has managed to accumulate quite a lot of stuff, it's hard to imagine that he is a very happy man at peace with himself and his stuff. So that's why in Buddhism we emphasize the mind, and why materialism seems to be such a problem. Our minds are continually fabricating objects to crave and objects to fear. This is completely ongoing activity. That's the way our minds work. They're generating, fabricating, creating these images of things to desire and things to fear. In fact, that's really what we're seeking and seeking to avoid. It's those mental images, not the things that they're images of. I thought at this point that I'd like to read a little from Into the Mirror, because I kind of like the way I described it there. So in Buddhism, one of the most fundamental teachings is what's called the Four Truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of its cause, the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering and the possibility of getting out of the bind, and the truth of the path, or the methods for producing cessation. So these four truths are very essential. It gives you the basic logic of Buddhism, that there is this problem of dissatisfaction or suffering, and it has a cause, and there's a possibility of getting out of it, which also has causes. So I thought I would read from a couple of paragraphs that describe suffering's cause and then the cessation of suffering. In foundational Buddhism, the causes of suffering are said to be craving and attachment. From the point of view of Mahayana Buddhism, this is where things get interesting. It is certainly true that craving and attachment are the causes of suffering. But as you begin to look deeply at craving and attachment, you see that the objects of craving and attachment are not the material or psychological or spiritual things we think we crave or try to cling to. The objects of this craving and attachment are our own projections, our mental versions of these objects. They are more like dreams of these things than the things themselves. That's why possessing them always disappoints. It might occur to you that a new home, a new relationship, or a new spiritual practice would improve your life considerably. You start hankering after this acquisition, and mental images of the object appear to you again and again. As you ponder the possible qualities and defects of what you crave, you don't realize that it is the mental image, your own projections, that are driving the show. You also don't realize that the self that is doing the craving is also a projection, a collection of mental images. Looked at from this perspective, the fundamental cause of suffering and dissatisfaction is ignorance, not recognizing the nature of what you are experiencing. Suffering's cessation. The third truth, the truth of cessation, means we are not condemned to suffering without end. It is definitely possible to find genuine peace. Shakyamuni Buddha described his realization as profound, peaceful, stainless, lucid, and unconditioned. Such is the nectar-like truth I have realized. His enlightenment demonstrates each of us has the potential for fundamental transformation. Suffering can be transformed into its opposite: bliss, joy, ease. You and I are fundamentally no different from the Buddha, but our true nature is currently shrouded by temporary obscurations. These veils are not part of our basic makeup, but they are deeply habitual. We are so habituated to experiencing the world through these delusions that they have become invisible to us. They seem to be part of the furniture of reality. However, the third truth teaches that these obscurations can be removed. A hopefully concrete example of our confusion about the nature of our experience could be right now, we're all looking at computer screens. At least I think that's what you guys are doing. I know that's what I'm doing. And there's light coming off of them. But it seems like we're looking at somebody talking. It seems like there's a person there that we're reacting to. Now, you may be listening to this and think, wow, this is really a waste of time. I'm going to click on something else. Or you might think, wow, this guy's really sharp. I'd really like to read that book. What was it called? So that's an example of how we experience one thing, which is just visual images coming off of a computer, but it feels like it's something very different. It feels like there's a human being there who's talking, who's describing things. It's not just sound coming out of a computer speaker. So I thought I would finish this little talk by telling you about the title of the book, Into the Mirror. My publisher, Shambhala Publications, has a committee that decides on the titles of books. I think it has another committee that decides what the cover of the books will be. And this is a process you go through when you're having a book published by them. I had a whole series of really not very good working titles for this book. They came up with a bunch of not very good working titles for this book. And my editor at Shambhala kept encouraging me to come up with something else, something new, something that would really suit the material. And I struggled with that, and she struggled with that. She was really helpful. But the morning the committee was going to meet, I woke up and Into the Mirror popped into my mind. I liked the sound of it. I liked the way it reminded me of Through the Looking Glass and Lewis Carroll, and a basic transformation, which I think is what the book is about, how to go through a basic transformation. And the committee really liked it, unanimously decided to use that as the title for the book. And then I didn't think about it too much more for almost a year, when one day I was getting ready to do something or other. And I had this insight that Into the Mirror was meaningful on a different level than I had understood. That so much of what this book is about is that we spend our lives chasing after reflections and running away from reflections. And that's what produces the bondage, the sense of being driven by our world, not being free. And that freedom comes from going into the mirror, becoming the mirror itself, rather than being continually led around by the reflections. So I think that's what I have to say. If you have any questions or comments, or if you want to engage in combat, I'm happy to do any of the above.
That was fantastic. Thank you so, so much. I found myself just lost in thought. I mean, I want to find out more. And yes, to everyone, there's plenty of time for questions and comments. If you want to submit them anywhere in the chat, on the Q&A. So I really, I know you have many years of experience, and I'm wondering kind of what motivated you how did you come up with this idea to write the book?
One of the main motivations for me was that I felt that Buddhism, which I am deeply committed to and connected with for all of my adult life, had a problem, had two problems. One problem was it often didn't know how to speak to the modern world. They often, Buddhist teachings are presented in very traditional allegories or language or structures that are hard for contemporary people to engage with.
Yes.
It had another problem, which was that contemporary people didn't get Buddhism often, and particularly people who had strong materialist beliefs. A lot of very smart people, as far as I can tell, something like 70% of working philosophers, academics in philosophy, believe in materialism. That's their worldview. And I'm sure it's similar for scientists. But it's a narrow belief system rather than a fact that everything is physical. And if you believe that, you're really cut off from learning to work with your mind, because the mind, according to the materialists, has no power. It's just like a display device for your computer. It's not actually doing anything. So on the one hand, I felt it was really important to speak to Buddhists and try to articulate some things that were contemporary and helpful. A lot of the book, or parts of the book, are based on Western philosophy, particularly the work of David Chalmers, who was the guy who first articulated what's called the hard problem, which has entered into the cultural vocabulary now. But also Bertrand Russell and Galen Strawson and a whole bunch of other contemporary philosophers who have challenged these kinds of materialist assumptions and beliefs. So I wanted Buddhists to be aware that there were sophisticated Western thinkers who were challenging materialism and presenting very helpful arguments that Buddhists could understand and use in our own practice and in communicating with other people. And I also wanted to present Buddhism in a way that contemporary philosophers and scientists and educated people might be able to understand.
That is a great answer, kind of a bridge the gap, if you will. I know that would benefit someone like me. What was the writing process like? Did it take you a while?
I'm a very slow writer.
Ah,
I started working on this project about 10 years ago and went through a couple of false starts, which I ended up throwing out. Stephen King tells a story in his book called On Writing, which is a great book. It's very helpful for writers, but this one story has always been my go-to cheer me up when I'm down about how slow my writing process is. He tells the story of James Joyce. James Joyce one day was in his study. A friend of his came over. Joyce had his head down on the desk. He looked distraught. The friend said, "James, what's the matter?" And Joyce said, "I only wrote 7 words today." And the friend said, "Well, James, for you, that's not so bad." And Joyce said, but I don't know what order they go in.
That's funny. So I guess
It's funny and it is helpful.
yeah.
On a bad writing day, that comes to the rescue every time.
I bet. You know, that writer's block is no joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you
But
started
anyway,
over if you
I
can.
actually like writing a lot, and
Yeah.
I'm not productive, but I do enjoy it, and I like words. I like using them, and I like refining them. Another book that is really helpful about writing is George Saunders' recent book called "A Swim in the Pond in the Rain," which talks about his process that he teaches at Syracuse to graduate writing students. And it's quite wonderful. And it's very much about putting down whatever comes to mind first, and then revising and going through it and making small adjustments again and again until it really becomes your voice, what you want to say.
It's very interesting. I just made a note so I can include that in the email that goes out tomorrow in case anyone wants to check it out.
Oh, it's a really good book.
Yeah, George Saunders is wonderful.
Yeah.
So I know
and he's a Buddhist.
yeah. So I know, it takes you a while and lots of ideas, but are you currently working on something? Is there anything kind of in the mind that you're thinking about for another book?
No, I'm not thinking, I'm not sure there's another book. 3 may be it.
3 is great.
Yeah, that was kind of, I had in mind at one point, 3 would be good. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I know you touched on this, and I love the idea of the transformation and into the mirror. I think that's a really awesome way to think about it and kind of bigger picture. What do you want readers to take from this, if anything?
Well, the first thing I would hope they take is that questioning some assumptions, questioning what's worthwhile, what is important, whether it's stuff or perhaps working with the mind. So that's number 1. The assumptions about our realities being so solid, like the way I see things is the way they really are. Hopefully that can get ventilated a little in reading this book. And then I didn't talk really about the second half of the book, which presents how the Mahayana Buddhist teachings unfold in a way that is a reflection of our journey, how we can make our own journey. So it provides a pathway that people can follow, at least to begin understanding the profundity of the Mahayana and applying it to themselves.
It's very interesting. So this book is for everyone, right? You don't need.
Well, I describe it as it's for Buddhist intellectuals and intellectuals who are Buddhist adjacent. So not everyone. I think, it's a bit, hopefully it's very readable. People tell me it's very easy to read, but a lot of it is challenging material. Mm-hmm. So some people just find it too rough going and don't want to continue. You have to have enough intellectual inquisitiveness to really be willing to make an effort with some of the material.
That's great. I really appreciate you being here this evening, and I've gotten a couple comments here saying that the book is easy to read and they really loved it, and admiration for putting this on paper, and yeah, lots of good feedback.
Terrific.
Is there any kind of last things that we wanted to touch on? There's still a few minutes if you guys have any comments or questions you still want to get in. No.
Yeah, it seems pretty rare that there are a lot of people who have questions online that they want to put in the chat, but
Well, the question about, is this being recorded? Yes, this is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email tomorrow. It'll have a link to the recording. It will have a link to Into the Mirror. It'll have the discount code and the suggestions for writing books, Stephen King and George Saunders. So if you just watched tonight and enjoyed yourself, no problem. We've got you covered. And thank you again. I know it's you're a little bit farther away from us in the time change. I really appreciate you being with us tonight, Andy.
well, thank you so much for hosting me and for organizing this event, Jamie. It's been a pleasure to meet you, and thanks to Copperfield Books for everything you do and do for your communities. So much appreciated.
Thank you. And when you come on your next tour or whenever you're in the area, please let us know so we can have you in store.
I'd love that.
Yeah, it'd be great to meet you in person.
That could happen. I may be leading a retreat in Berkeley or Oakland in the fall. So
well, keep us posted, please, even if it's just to sign some stock. We would love to meet you.
great. Thanks so much, Amy.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too.